And now, it's time to start talking about the new stuff. This is the exciting part of the week, and it's not going to let up. Obviously, ZA spoilers ahead. I'm going to make a conscious effort to not put these spoilers in thumbnails, because I'm a nice person. But, welcome to spoilers on when it comes for the rest of this series. How's it going, guys? And welcome to episode 3 of the Road to Champions. This is the episode where I'm going to be looking at some of the new megas and highlighting the ones that I'm particularly excited for when it comes to Draft League. And that could be for a variety of different reasons that I'll go over in this vid. If you guys are looking forward to some more Champions content, as well as just enjoying this series in general, do let me know. And if you have any feedback in terms of this blitz of content you're getting this week, also let me know, because I'm still kind of figuring out what I want to do, and hearing feedback on things like this is appreciated. Without further ado, let's talk some megas. Let's kick this mega hype train off with a mon that I've been excited for a long time. I've really enjoyed this thing in draft, more than most people I would say. And while yes, it's not as good in later gens, this mega should give it the bump that it needs. I'm talking about Mega Skarmory. Now, the interesting thing about Mega Skarmory is, yes, it lost some phys def, dropping from 140 down to 110. The thing is, though, it got a massive speed bump up to 110, and now with a base 140 attack, meaning that its Brave Birds are actually going to hit kind of hard. You combine that with the fact that you have access to weak armor prior to Mega Evolving, meaning that you can just be a ridiculously fast, really hard-hitting attacker if you switch it in the right situations because of that natural phys def that Skarmory possesses. You combine that with its already great utility options, because it can be a fast rocker, it can be a fast spiker, it still has access to roost, you can run the Iron Defense body press set still, and even Swords Dance is now viable because you have Brave Bird, Iron Head, and you Drill Run for opposing steals. It very much is going to depend on its ability. Like, for example, if you look at ZAOU, it has access to Tough Claws, which is really, really solid. But I don't think they'll go down that route, but if they give it any sort of good ability to boost its offensive power, this thing could be an absolute demon. And it could even technically pursue Trap if that move decides to come back into the game. Overall, I think this thing is going to be really, really good, because of the fact that you have the ability to switch in the first place, and then just turn into an offensive behemoth, which all you needed was a weak armor boost. Obviously, as well, you're still a very good natural resist to Fairy, and with its few weaknesses, and obviously compared to the last generation with Megas, electric types are nowhere near as common. So, it's safe to say, I think this thing's going to be pretty good, and I'm excited to use it when the time comes. If you told me a couple of months ago that I would be hyped to use a Mega Meowstic, I would call you absolutely insane. However, that's the reality we're in, because I think this thing is going to be ridiculously good. A base speed of 124 and a special attack stat of 143 means that it's an incredibly hard hitter that has everything that it could possibly need. Obviously, its physical bulk of 74 and 76 respectively isn't ideal, but we'll get into why this thing is still great. You obviously have Prankster prior to Mega Evolving, and you have a lot of options that you would like. The only one that you're probably missing is Encore. And if this thing gets Encore, I think this is going to be an absolutely insane mon. But there's no point wishing for stuff with this thing, because it got everything else that it could have wanted. I'm not going to talk about this thing in the buffs video, but it's probably one of the biggest winners when it comes to buffs, as it got access to every single hazard, as well as Moonblast, and that's insane. It makes the nasty plot sets even better because you have good coverage to actually hit dark types, have all the utility you could want, you could set every single hazard, you can be a substitute attacker with that natural speed, and the only thing you're kind of missing out on hitting is steel types, which even then, just if we compare it to ZAOU gave it Psychic Surge, and that's what makes it insane, because you can just expand and force down the steel types. However, I think if you combine this thing with good hazard support, and you're just constantly wearing those steel types down, in the end this thing's going to be a problem. And sure, look, watch them give it Earth Power anyways, because why not? Or Focus Blast, but Earth Power would be far nicer. I'm very impressed with the buffs that they gave this thing, and it's safe to say that I think it's going to be pretty good. Although, when it comes to these psychic types, there's a bit of a trend of, I think they're all going to be pretty nice to use. continuing our trend of talking about Mega Psychic types, because I'm a sucker for Psychic types in general, not because of the typing, just because they're typically all awesome and super versatile. We get to probably the mon from the DLC that I'm most hyped about. I know I just talked about Meowstic, but this thing I think is even higher on the list. And that is Mega Chimecho. And I know what you're thinking, TJ, it's a Chimecho, how can it be that good? Hear me out on this one, alright? So, they gave it a steel typing, which is fantastic. They gave it ridiculously good bulk of 75, 110, 120, while also having base 135 special attack. And a speed stat that means it outspeeds most of the walls, which could be quite good. Effectively, this thing is better Bronzong, which Bronzong in generations without mechanics, pretty usable. But then we get into the utility that it has. Obviously, we all know this thing's a Healing Wish mon. It's one of the few mons that kept Heal Bell in Gen 9. It has access to Taunt, it has access to Knockoff, it has Psychic Noise. They gave it Flash Cannon, so it'll actually have Steel Stab this generation. It obviously has access to Thunder Wave and Yawn, and Trick Room, and things like that. Even Calm Mindsets can be very difficult to deal with, because it also has access to Dazzling Gleam and Training Kiss. And you combine that with the fact that it's also a defogger, which can be quite nice as another removal option in a generation that we're not sure how much it's going to have. And for good measure, they gave it Boom Burst. Why not give it Boom Burst? Sure, give it Boom Burst. Obviously, this is incredibly reliant on it keeping Levitate, but I imagine it will. There's no reason for it to lose it. Honestly, Mega Chimecho has every utility option that it could possibly want for its bulk, and I think this thing is going to be really, really nice to use, provided that it's not ridiculously overpriced, which it could be. But I think if this kind of hits its mid-tier Mega slot from like 10 to low teens, this thing is going to be a really nice mon to just slap on a bunch of teams with offensive threats. This thing also has access to Teleport, I should have said that. It does get slow Teleport, which is really, really good. Does it get Teleport? It should get Teleport. It used to get Teleport anyways. And if it doesn't, it gets Baton Pass anyway. So it does have options of being a slow pivot. So, overall, really, really good mon. Has a bunch of stuff going in its favor. Even its offensive coverage is great, off its special attack stat. So if you want to use it as like a Trick Room breaker, go ahead, do it. It'll probably work. So yeah, Mega Chimecho, I think this thing's going to be really, really good in a bunch of different formats, and Draft is probably its biggest win because of its versatility. Ever since this thing had its absolutely incredible reveal trailer, Mega Hawlucha has been a super interesting mon that I wanted to see what its stats distribution was. Especially when it was talking about its dex entry of it getting more bulk, which did make people worry about speed drops. However, it didn't get a speed drop. Instead, now with a bulk of 78, 193, which is pretty usable, and an attack stat of 137. This thing still has the ridiculous speed of Hawlucha, still has the ridiculous utility of Hawlucha, because you have access to Taunt, you have access to Encore, you can U-turn out, you have access to Roost, you can defog with this thing, but where it's really going to shine, it's going to be its bulk up and its SD sets. You obviously still have all the fantastic coverage that you used to get. You have your dual stabs in Close Combat and Brave Bird, or if you want to go down, you can do like Drain Punch into a Wing Beat, you have a Jump Kick, you have so many different options. And you combine that with Poison Jab, you combine that with the Elemental Punches, which it has gotten in previous generations, which maybe it won't keep at, well, it has Fire Punch, it doesn't have Thunder Punch, which sucks, but it does have, no, it does have Thunder Punch. What am I saying? I'm being ridiculous. And then, of course, you have Throat Chop and X-Scissor to deal with the Psychics, and this thing is just great. You have all the options you want. You have the added bulk so that you can get slow setups, similar to how like a Mega Gallade can run like bulky SD sets sometimes, except this thing is even faster, but doesn't quite hit as hard, but I'm not sure you'd need that damage. Overall, I think Mega Hawlucha is going to be super duper good. A small shout out to Mega Staraptor in this category, because very similar typing, and I think it's just going to be like a cheaper version of this. Doesn't have access to the same setup options, but it can like agility and just break. But it's not going to be as good, and you do have Intimidate prior to Mega evolving just for added, just for added comfort. But overall, I think Mega Hawlucha is going to be one of the ones that makes the biggest splash. The variety of options that it has could make it a bit of a nightmare in prep, and if you put the right things around it, such as good hazard support and a good pursuit trapper, and this thing could very easily snowball. Before we get into our fifth and final Mega, I have a couple honorable mentions that I wanted to bring up here. as I've said about the Psychics so many times in this video, I might as well chuck one more in. Why not? And that would be Mega Delphox. The speed tier is absolutely fantastic at 134, and obviously its offensive coverage is great. If it gets a good ability to help it, such as Magic Guard, this thing could be an absolute behemoth, especially with its 135 base special attack. And when you have access to Nasty Plot, Agility, and the coverage that you have, this thing's going to be pretty good. We then get on to Barbarical, which I think could be one of the biggest winners of this, because of the fact that it now has the Rock Fighting typing. And while that's not much better from a defensive standpoint for Rock Water, it does mean that it has more options to be able to get a Shell Smash off, assuming it keeps it. And then, with you having Stab Close Combat, Stab Stone Edge, and then you obviously still have the coverage of the Water Stab that Barbarical previously had, and this thing's going to be pretty good. I think it could be one of those mons that, if it's on like screen spams teams and HL, could be very difficult to stop, because its bulk means it probably should be able to live one hit, especially on the physical side, even if it is Shell Smashed. And lastly, I do love me a slow, bulky offensive demon, except it also has a ridiculous attack stat. And that's what brings us to Mega Golurk, which I think is going to be pretty fun. It keeps its same speed tier. It now has a bulk of 89, 105, 105, and you have that with a base 159 attack stat with Stab, EQ, and Poltergeist, as well as all the elemental punches that it gets naturally. This thing could be absolutely terrifying, either in Trick Room as a mon that's just going to click buttons, or even just having a bunch of opportunities to get off a Rock Polish, assuming that that is still in the game. I think Mega Golurk could be incredibly fun, and once again, if it's tiered right, this thing could be great. And adds another one to the list of fantastic grounds, which is going to be a nice complaint compared to our lack of them in SV. We round things off with what I think is a correction of a Mega that previously just wasn't as good. We all are aware, or at least us old heads, of a very famous copy pasta that was written about how Mega Absol is one of the worst things in existence. However, I think with the introduction of Mega Absol Z, a lot of that's been fixed, and I'm way more excited about this thing now. You compare Mega Absol Z to its regular counterpart, and the big thing you will see immediately is that it's nowhere near as dedicated as a mixed attacker. The special attack goes all the way down to 75, but what you gain instead, slightly more attack and way more speed. That speed tier of 151 is going to be so nice in this minigame, especially because of the fact you do get over the two 150s of Aerodactyl and Alakazam. Although Alakazam will never be legal anywhere, let's not even talk about that thing. And what else do you get? You get a Ghost typing, meaning that you have even more resistances and only one weakness in Fairy, which should help with Absol in terms of getting off sword stances. And if there's one thing that Absol always had, it was great utility, because it did have access to stuff like Will-O-Wisp and Destiny Bond, which is always weird stuff, but still pretty good. And then you have that with its insanely good physical coverage, which has only gotten better over time, because you now have access to close combat, which is the big one. And all of a sudden, this thing could be an absolute nightmare. And that's without even factoring in the fact that it might get more Ghost Stab than what it did in just Phantom Force and Shadow Sneak going into ZA. You obviously have Mega Horn as well, just to add for your coverage for the bulky Dark types, in case you're like playing the Berry Mine game. Overall, I think the speed tier is going to be really good. I think its bulk just about does enough to where it can get off SDs, and then you're just kind of clicking fast Sucker Punch or fast Shadow Sneak, and people can't out priority you. And if you do have, the necessary hazard support or the necessary chip, this thing in endgames could be an absolute nightmare. And then obviously you still have access to Iron Tail for fairies. Although, if this thing does get Poltergeist, this thing's going to be a top tier Mega. I'm saying this right now if it gets Poltergeist. But I feel like they're not going to do that, which sucks, but it's fine. Overall, this thing is probably going to be one of the most potent physical attackers around. Obviously, especially in terms of the new ones, because its power level is absolutely insane. I think it's going to fit right into this metagame. And hopefully, should be a fun one. And that concludes 5 Megas that I'm hyped for in ZA Draft. Which I also included a couple honorable mentions, because I want to talk about as many of them as possible. In tomorrow's video, I will go over the Megas that I think might be too good and that we may have to ban. Maybe not immediately in draft, but, I'd say they will get banned relatively quickly. If you guys have enjoyed this breakdown of some of the Megas I'm hyped for, please do let me know by leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and letting me know what megas are you hyped for in draft. I'm down for any sort of discussion. Anyways guys, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll chat to you tomorrow. Peace!